Okay, welcome back. So, in the discussion box, we had a number of, I thought, really good questions or good observations this week, some of which I didn't get to in the discussion thread, so I wanted to discuss them in greater detail. So, again, thank you to everyone who's been participating in the discussion section. So, I thought Joanne had a number of really interesting comments, and I wanted to address just a few of them. Uh, Talking about her experience at the Uffizi, it was a little disappointing to hear that, Joanne, when you went from place to place to place and the tour guide is trying to rush you around the museum. Um, I think the way that we interact with art uh, as Americans really leaves a lot to be desired. So, I would say I know a number of you like to go to museums, and let me just challenge you: the next time that you know that you're going to hit a museum, rather than trying to see everything in the space of a few hours, find a painting or two paintings or one sculpture, and see if you can do a little research online, and then spend 10 or 15 minutes in front of it, and and try it that way. So I've done it too. When you're trying to hit three museums in a day, that can be daunting. So I think I know what happened here. So you probably flew into Rome or to Malpensa in Milan, which is the largest airport in northern Italy, and you tried to do Florence, or the tour group that you were on tried to do Florence in a day, and it's very difficult to do Florence in a day. So if you did a walking tour and you saw the Duomo and you saw the Campanile and you saw the Baptistry, and then you also tried to hit the Piazza del Duomo, and you also tried to do the Uffizi and the Galleria Accademia, then that's and the Ponte Vecchio, and just try to cram it into 24 hours. That's an impossibility. So, pro tip for next time. Florence is I think the most beautiful city in Italy. It's not the most visited, but it is the prettiest. So try to break it up. You know. Um, the other thing too is if you have to choose between the Galleria Accademia and the Uffizi, pick the Uffizi, because the Galleria has one great thing, the David, but when we talk more about the David and Michelangelo this week, I'll give you a pro hack there. So, and you might be thinking, well, why even try to fit Florence in one day? Why do the Milan to Florence to Venice down to Rome to Naples? Why try to fit all that in? Is that uniquely American? And it's not. Um, Once the Renaissance changes European culture, and there is a new appreciation in Northern Europe for the places and the sites, especially in antiquity. We see this phenomenon popping up in places like England and what will become Germany in the 17th and 18th centuries. So it's very common for young men to be sent on what we call the Grand Tour. So uh, after you finish your studies at Oxford or Heidelberg or something, you would find a tour guide, and that person would take you all over France and then all over Italy and then maybe into even Greece to study some of the famous sites of antiquity and to go to some of these famous museums. And it was thought that sending a young man on the Grand Tour, even if you're racing through these places, was a culturally relevant experience. The idea here is twofold. One, it's a cautionary tale. So here we are, we're the English, we're masters of the universe, we're masters of this global uh, maritime network, and colonies all over the world, and we're the greatest, most powerful country in the world. But look at Rome. At one point, Rome was where we are, and they've fallen. Um, One thinks of the poem Ozymandias by Lord Byron. You know, here we are. This is a great empire, but just like the last great empire, it's going to fall. So don't be overcome by your own hubris. The other reason is, starting in the Renaissance, we have this idea now that in order to be a complete person, in order to be a noble man or a noble woman, you have to be culturally literate. If we go back to the late Middle Ages, or the center part of the Middle Ages, and we look at the greatest man during that time, if we look at Charlemagne, Charlemagne would have been an object of pity to the Renaissance man. Here we have a great emperor and someone who was, by all accounts, politically astute and religiously astute, but he couldn't read or write. He would have been an object of pity and scorn. So to be a complete person in the Middle Ages, one had to exhibit these, what we call courtly virtues. But to be a complete person, a well-rounded person in the Renaissance, you had to know about these things. You had to be able to read or write. You had to be well-rounded. And so we'll talk a little bit more here about well-roundedness. But in terms of our ability to interact with these artworks, you know, Joanne, don't feel bad. People race through the Louvre too. You could spend weeks and weeks in the Louvre. It is the most visited museum in the world, and this is the gallery where the Mona Lisa is. And I always tell people the Mona Lisa is the only painting on earth that you can hear before you see it. Because for most of the Louvre, you can walk by, and even on days when it's crowded, you can get right up and see a painting. You cannot do that with the Mona Lisa, because it is the most popular and recognizable two-dimensional piece of art on planet Earth. So there it is. I stole this picture from the internet because you could never get a picture of the Mona Lisa that looks like this. I'm going to show you some of my pictures of the Mona Lisa. So on the left, I stole that from the internet. This is what the gallery that houses the Mona Lisa looks like on any given day. On the right is a picture that I took last year, and I wanted to make sure that I got the cell phones of people who were just kind of like walking up to the Mona Lisa and taking a picture of it with their cell phone cameras. I thought that was kind of like cool duality there. So are they interacting with the painting? Are they there to really try to get a sense of what it looks like or what it is? Or are they just taking their, hey, I'm in France, I'm going to get a picture with the Eiffel Tower, I'm going to get a picture at the Louvre, I'm going to get a picture of the Mona Lisa, and I'm done, cross it off my grand tour or cross it off my bucket list. So, but in terms of what it meant for people during the Renaissance to be a complete person, I've mentioned earlier in the video series about these Renaissance values, how what people value are changing over time, and we've talked about humanism and secularism and this need to go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, classicism, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism. And the Burckhardt and others have talked about the Renaissance as being the triumph of the individual. Well, there's another value here that we should probably talk about, and it's the idea of well-roundedness. If you've heard of someone being spoken of as a Renaissance man, or this person is a Renaissance woman, what we mean is they're good at a lot of different things. Think of Leonardo da Vinci, for example, who was a master painter, and he worked in oils, he worked in fresco, but he was also a scientist, he was also a mathematician, he was also a biologist of sorts. Or Michelangelo, who was a master sculptor, but also a master painter. The idea of being well-rounded is important in the Renaissance as well. So that's why we see people in uh, the Baroque period, or the Age of Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, or even today in Europe and America, being sent on this grand tour. You know, you may be an amazing high school student and a great mathematician, but in order to be a well-rounded person, I want you to take humanities classes as well. I'm going to send you to Europe with Mr. Colton for a couple weeks, and he's going to enjoy his free trip, and you're gonna get some culture. And where should we look to see evidence of that? Well, Baldassare Castiglione wrote a book called The Book of the Courtier. Courtier is someone who attends court. Courtier is someone who attends to the king or the queen or the prince. And he talked about what a Renaissance man ought to be. It's interesting that part of that idea, like what is a Renaissance man, goes all the way back to the classical period. Aristotle, in the Golden Age of Greece, talked about the idea that a well-rounded person ought to be able to play the flute, but not too well. Why not too well? Well, if you play a musical instrument too well, it is evidence that you have devoted your entire life to the study of that musical instrument, which probably means that you haven't been able to spend time in the pursuit of other interests. So the evidence of your great flute playing, or the fact that you can play the flute so well, is evidence that you are not well rounded. A courtier should be someone who can speak several languages, someone who is adroit in the military arts, but also someone who pursues humanist interests too. The so-called studia humanitatis. I'm someone who knows geography. I also know astronomy. Someone who knows. I don't personally know these things, by the way, but someone who knows, algebra, and someone who can, think of the Renaissance men that we associate American history with. Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, someone like that, someone who was athletic. Uh, you know, there are English monarchs who fancied themselves Renaissance men. So, perfect example is Henry VIII, who in his youth was a humanist scholar, uh, writing treatises with Thomas More, St. Thomas More, but also a guy who it was said, wearing a full suit of armor, could leap onto the back of his horse. So be athletic. And then Castiglione also coins this phrase, which I've always really liked. I thought it really gets to the heart of what a Renaissance man is, and what Italian men are, and that's the word sprezzatura. And this helps us answer the question: why are Italian men so fashionable? Well, take a look at this guy. Obviously, his suit fits him perfectly. He's wearing $1,000 Italian suit. But take a look at his tie. You notice how the tie is kind of tied effortlessly, and it's almost like it doesn't. He didn't give the tying of his tie any thought. The rear part of the tie is kind of sticking out to the side. So sprezzatura is kind of a careful carelessness. Like, I'm fashionable, I'm going to put myself together, but something's not right. And why you make something not right? Maybe your socks don't match. Maybe your pocket square isn't folded properly, because you want people to think that you threw this outfit together without giving it too much thought. Oh, I look great, but no, I didn't spend too much time doing this. I can play the flute, but I haven't really practiced it. It's just another thing that I can do. See how the bottom of the tie there kind of sticks below the top of the tie? So, a little bit about how your little bit about how your unfortunate museum experience there is something that we've been doing for hundreds of years. Um, So don't feel too bad about it. But next time you've got a trip to Italy, try to take it. You can spend a day at the Uffizi, and those of you that did the virtual tour, I'm sure know exactly what I mean. Oh, the other part of your question was this observation. I really liked it. Um, those of you who have spent considerable time in Europe, in places like Spain and Italy and Greece and France and really anywhere, probably have encountered something very similar. So you're in a very touristy area in Italy or Greece. You're in a main city somewhere in one of these countries, and you will see older women beggars or very young children as beggars. Sometimes like a young teenage girl. She looks like she might be 13 or 14, and she has like younger children with her, maybe a baby, and they'll come up and they'll ask you for money. So those that's an interesting aspect of Renaissance history. So you probably know who these folks are. These are the Roma. So who were the Roma? In the late Middle Ages and Renaissance period, a group of or a migratory ethnicity came to settle in different places of Europe. And sometimes we think of these European countries as lacking diversity. I go to Norway, it's filled with Norwegians. If I go to Finland, it's filled with Finns. And if I go north, I encounter Laplanders. If I go to France, I encounter the French. But that hasn't always been the case. So if we go to Renaissance Venice, for example, we see the first ghetto. Ghetto was a place in the city, or late medieval Venice, I should say, a place in the city, a separate place where the Jews of the city would live. So a number of these countries and a number of these cities have Jewish minorities, and starting in the late medieval period and through the Renaissance and beyond, the Roma people um, represent a tiny minority, or in some cases, a significant minority. Uh, if you've ever been to Albania, the Roma are about 5% of the country. And a lot of them are beggars, which is why, unfortunately, a lot of people have kind of hardened their hearts to the Romani people, to the Roma people. Um, they do fortune telling. There's all sorts of negative stereotypes about this group. They are a protected minority group in Europe. A number of them live in the United States too. Uh, let's see. Oh, well, here's something interesting. When the first Romani group gets to Greece, the Venetians, who at that time were running Greece, uh, tried to figure out who they were, and the group themselves said that they were fleeing persecution in Lower Egypt. So this is why the English and Americans typically call this group gypsies. But the term gypsy is kind of a pejorative, so we use the term Roma today. So these are the gypsies, these are the Roma. And we've been plumbing gypsy culture, by the way, Western Europe, for artistic inspiration as far back as the Renaissance. Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame is a story about gypsies. Bizet's Carmen is one of the great operas in all of history, and that's a story about gypsies. So, um, if you're somebody that doesn't, uh, if these folks make you uncomfortable, it's okay. I would say there are anywhere you go, anytime you travel to a touristy area, you got to be on the guard for pickpockets of all shapes and sizes. Not necessarily just gypsies, but all sorts of people. Okay, uh, Mike and Denise had asked me to address some things about Spain, and like I said in my response to them, when we look at the golden age of Spain, that takes place after the discovery of the New World and this enormous infusion of cash in the form of silver and gold that come to Spain. So if we were to do a class specifically on Baroque art, then yeah, we would probably begin in Spain and in Spain's possessions around Europe. Spain becomes so powerful as a result of its mercantile wealth that it Spain really comes close to conquering all of continental Europe. I would say the closest Europe has ever come to being united in a single continental Europe in a single country was in the 1940s under Hitler, in the first decade of the 19th century under Napoleon, but under Charles V, Carlos V of Spain, came very close to uniting all of Western Christendom under one banner. Basically, it was Charles V's empire and France. So the art that comes out of the Baroque period and the art that comes out of Charles V's Spain and Charles V's Netherlands and Spanish Netherlands, really amazing. So if we were to do Baroque, we would definitely talk about it. But maybe we'll do a tie-in towards the end of the course as Mannerism and traditional Renaissance art gives way to the Baroque period. I don't know too much about Salvador Dali. I know that I like him, but this is Salvador Dali, who died in the 1980s. This is his famous one of his famous paintings, The Persistence of Memory, The Melting Clocks. Just about every college student has this on their in their dorm at some point, I think. Two more Dali paintings. There's the Temptation of St. Anthony on the left. There's a very important Dali museum in St. Petersburg that Mike and Denise mentioned. A lot of his stuff is also at the Prado, where those guys have been too. If you take a look at my Venice presentation, we're going to spend a little bit of time at the Prado in Spain. But when we look at the Surrealist movement in the early 20th century, late 19th century, it's impossible to look at these paintings and not see how they were influenced by the Northern Renaissance. So when you go to the Prado in Spain, you'll see this triptych. And if you'll recall from an earlier lecture, I talked about a diptych, a triptych, and a polytych. And all that means is usually these altarpieces that are divided into three. Tri meaning three, tych. So you have three panels here, and this is by Hieronymus Bosch. And usually we talk about Renaissance art as being hyper-real, or aspects of realism, aspects of Greek realism and classicism revived. But there is so much non-realism going on here. And on the left, we have Garden of Eden, Jesus with, or God with Adam and Eve. And then in the center panel, we see the consequences of man being evicted from the Garden of Eden and men and women doing what men and women do, which is engaging in all sorts of different kinds of sin. And then in the third panel, we see the wages of sin and the what happens when you are cast into hell. And such an interesting painting. When we get into the Northern Renaissance, I hope we can talk a little bit more about Hieronymus Bosch. Okay, great questions this week, and thank you for them.